At exactly 6:01 p.m., the steel door slid shut behind him. The room was silent, except for the sound of chains. No jury, no appeal left, no way out. This was Texas death row, and this was Blaine Milan's final walk. Texas carries out more executions than any other state in America. Behind the razor wire, sealed doors, and concrete walls is a system designed for one purpose: finality. Tonight, we take you inside the last hours of a condemned inmate, known here as Blaine Milan, a composite identity based on documented Texas death row procedures, execution protocols, and official records. From years spent in isolation, to the moment the death warrant is read, to the final words spoken before witnesses look on. This is not just the story of one man. It's a rare look into how capital punishment really works in the United States, and what happens when the clock finally runs out. Stay with us. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. Inside Texas Death Row, where time stops. Texas Death Row is not a place designed for living. It is a place designed for waiting. For Blaine Milan, that wait began the moment the jury foreman stood, cleared his throat, and said the words that changed everything. "We sentence the defendant to death." From that moment forward, Blaine was no longer just an inmate. He became a number, a case file, a condemned man. Texas houses its death row inmates under some of the most restrictive conditions in the Western world. Blaine was transferred to a high-security unit where every movement was logged, every conversation monitored, every hour measured. His cell was small, concrete on all sides. No bars, just a steel door with a narrow slot. Inside that cell, Blaine spent 22 to 23 hours a day alone. The isolation was relentless. Lights never fully went dark. Silence was broken only by distant doors slamming shut. Meals were passed through a slot. No eye contact required. And like many death row inmates, Blaine's body told its own story. His arms, neck, and chest were marked with gang-style tattoos, symbols of affiliation, survival, and a past life that followed him behind the walls. Each tattoo carried history, some personal, some violent, some forgotten by everyone except him. Texas Death Row is governed by strict protocol. Inmates are allowed limited personal property, a few books, legal papers, religious material. Phone calls are rare. Physical contact is nearly non-existent. Years passed this way. Appeals came and went. Lawyers filed motions. Courts reviewed transcripts. And every denial tightened the noose. For Blaine, hope didn't disappear all at once. It eroded slowly. Each appeal rejected by higher courts chipped away at the future he no longer believed in. The psychological pressure is something few outsiders understand. On death row, you don't count years. You count court dates. Every knock on the door could mean new paperwork. Every announcement over the loudspeaker could be another inmate's execution. Blaine watched men disappear. One week they were shouting down the tier. The next, their cells were empty. Texas does not hide executions from death row inmates. They hear the preparations. They feel the tension ripple through the unit. When an execution date was finally set for Blaine Milan, it arrived quietly, in the form of a folded document slid under his door. The death warrant. It listed the date, the time, the method. From that moment on, everything changed. His routine tightened. Guards watched him more closely. Mental health checks increased. Texas execution protocol requires that once a warrant is active, the inmate enters a controlled countdown phase. Blaine was now living on borrowed hours. Spiritual advisors were offered. Final visits were scheduled. Personal property was inventoried. Even the air felt heavier. For the first time in years, Blaine was allowed longer showers. Small privileges meant nothing now, but they were part of the ritual. On death row, the final days are not chaotic. They are methodical. Every step follows procedure. Every action is recorded. And as the execution date approached, Blaine began preparing in his own way. Reading, pacing, staring at the wall where countless nights had already been lost. There would be no last-minute miracle. Texas rarely stops an execution once the final warrant is signed. By the night before his execution, Blaine knew the truth every condemned inmate eventually faces. Tomorrow, he would take the last walk, and Texas would be ready. The final countdown, last visits, last meals, last hope. The final day on Texas death row does not begin with chaos. It begins with routine. For Blaine Milan, execution day started the same way every other day had for years, except everyone knew it was different. At 5 a.m., the lights came on. Guards moved down the corridor with measured steps. No shouting, no announcements, no ceremony. Texas execution protocol demands calm. Blaine was awakened, searched, and escorted from his cell to a holding area known as the Death Watch cell, a place reserved only for inmates scheduled to die within hours. The cell was cleaner, brighter, designed for observation. Every movement was now documented. From that moment on, Blaine was never alone. A correctional officer sat outside his cell at all times. Mental health staff checked on him. Medical personnel confirmed identity, physical condition, and responsiveness. Everything had to be verified, because once the process started, there could be no uncertainty. This is where the countdown becomes real. The last visits. Texas allows condemned inmates final visits, but they are nothing like normal prison visits. There is no touching, no hand-holding, no last embrace. Blaine's visitors, family members, approved contacts, and a spiritual advisor were brought into a secure visiting area separated by thick glass. Phones were used. Conversations were monitored. Some cried. Some stared silently. Some said nothing at all. Witness accounts from Texas executions consistently describe these final visits as the most emotionally intense moments of the entire process. Not because of what is said, but because of what cannot be changed. Blaine spoke slowly, deliberately. He apologized to some, avoided certain topics with others, and said goodbye without ever using the word. For many death row inmates, these visits reopen old wounds, broken families, abandoned relationships, children grown up without them. For Blaine, the past pressed in from all sides. His tattoos, symbols of power and survival from his earlier life, now seemed meaningless. On death row, reputation no longer mattered. Only time did. When the final visit ended, the phone was placed back on the hook. The glass remained. Guards opened the door and escorted the visitors away. Blaine never watched them leave. The last meal. Texas once allowed elaborate last meals. That ended years ago. Now, inmates may choose from the regular prison menu. Blaine was offered his final meal in the early afternoon. Official records from Texas executions show that many inmates eat very little or nothing at all. Blaine took a few bites, paused, then pushed the tray away. Hunger disappears when the mind is elsewhere. Every action now had a timestamp. Every pause was noted. Medical staff returned to confirm vitals. The execution team began preparing the chamber. Chemicals were measured. Equipment tested. Curtains checked. This is the side of execution the public rarely sees, the logistics. Texas executions are rehearsed. Nothing is left to chance. Spiritual counseling. In the hours leading up to execution, inmates are offered access to spiritual advisors of their choosing. Blaine accepted. They spoke quietly. No dramatic speeches. No last-minute conversions. In many cases, these conversations are less about faith and more about grounding, keeping the inmate calm, oriented, cooperative. Texas protocol requires that the inmate be conscious, responsive, and able to walk unassisted to the execution chamber. Blaine met those requirements. The waiting. By late afternoon, time slowed to a crawl. The hallway outside the holding cell filled with controlled movement. Officers, supervisors, legal observers. No one spoke louder than necessary. Blaine sat on the edge of his bunk. Years earlier, he had been loud, aggressive, known across units for his presence, his inked skin, his affiliations. Death row stripped that away piece by piece. Now, he was just a man waiting for a door to open. At approximately 5:30 p.m., the warden arrived. The death warrant was read aloud. Name, case number, sentence. Blaine acknowledged it. There were no protests, no last-minute appeals. Once the warrant is read, The execution is officially underway. The walk. Texas executions involve what is known as the last walk. The distance is short, often less than 100 feet, but it carries more weight than any walk a human being can take. Blaine stood. His hands were cuffed in front of him. Leg restraints applied. An escort formed on both sides. Witness accounts describe this walk as surreal. There is no rushing, no force. The inmate is guided, not dragged. As Blaine moved down the corridor, he passed doors he had never seen open before. Administrative offices. Observation rooms. The execution chamber entrance. The air felt colder here. Inside the chamber, the gurney waited, strapped, angled slightly upward. Lines hung nearby, already primed. Blaine was positioned carefully. Straps were secured at the ankles, legs, waist, arms, and chest. Each strap was checked twice. Then again, a medical professional inserted 4 lines. One arm, then the other. Texas requires a backup line in case one fails. Blaine stared at the ceiling. Witnesses, victim family members, media representatives, state officials took their seats behind thick glass. They could see everything. He could see none of them clearly. Final words. Texas allows condemned inmates to make a final statement. The microphone was activated. Blaine spoke. His voice was steady. Short sentences. No shouting. Some words were directed at the victim's family. Others toward his own. Then he stopped. The microphone was turned off. The warden gave the signal. The injection. At approximately 6:01 p.m., the first drug entered the 4-line. Sedation. Blaine's breathing slowed. His chest rose and fell. A second drug followed, paralysis. Then the final chemical. Silence filled the chamber. A medical professional checked for responsiveness. Then for a heartbeat. At 6:14 p.m., Blaine Milan was pronounced dead. Aftermath. The witnesses were escorted out. Paperwork was signed. Time of death recorded. The execution team cleaned the chamber. Outside the prison walls, traffic continued. Restaurants stayed open. Life moved on. Inside, one more cell on death row was empty. And Texas had carried out another execution, exactly as designed. Behind the glass, witnesses, silence, and the weight of finality. Executions don't end when the chemicals stop flowing. For many people, that's when the real impact begins. Behind the thick observation glass inside the Texas execution chamber, witnesses sit in silence, frozen in a moment they will never forget. On one side of the glass, Blaine Milan lay strapped to the gurney, his chest no longer moving. On the other side, people watched the irreversible happen. Who gets to watch? Texas law strictly controls who may witness an execution. Inside the viewing room that evening were representatives of the victim's family, selected media witnesses, state officials, prison administrators. Each witness had been searched, screened, and escorted in silence. Phones were confiscated. Notes were allowed, but only after the execution began. The room itself was small, clinical, and deliberately impersonal. No decorations, no symbols, just glass, chairs, and a clear line of sight. Witnesses are instructed not to speak, not to gesture, and not to disrupt the process in any way. This is not a courtroom. There are no objections here. For the victim's family, emotions vary widely. Some stare intensely, waiting for the exact second life ends. Others look away. Some cry. Some feel nothing at all, because grief doesn't always arrive on schedule. For media witnesses, the responsibility is heavy. They are there to observe, record, and report, not to interpret. Their job is to describe what happened exactly as it happened. And for prison staff, this is another duty performed under policy and procedure. Professional, controlled, silent. The moment after death. Once Blaine was pronounced dead, the room remained quiet. Texas protocol requires witnesses to stay seated until directed otherwise. No one is allowed to approach the glass. No one is allowed to speak to prison staff. The body remains strapped to the gurney. A medical professional performs additional checks. Paperwork is completed. Times are confirmed. Executions are legal events. And like all legal events, documentation matters. Only after confirmation does the warden quietly announce that the execution has been carried out. That announcement is the signal. Witnesses stand. They're escorted out. The door closes behind them. There is no applause, no acknowledgement, just the echo of footsteps leaving the chamber. What witnesses carry with them? Former execution witnesses often describe the same sensation afterward, a kind of mental weight that doesn't lift easily. Some report hyperfocus on small details, the color of the walls, the sound of the gurney straps tightening, the exact moment breathing stopped. Others experience delayed reactions. The image returns later, in dreams, in quiet moments, in the middle of unrelated conversations. Texas does not provide counseling for witnesses by default. Once you've seen it, it's yours to carry. Inside the prison after an execution. Back inside the death row unit, inmates know when an execution has occurred, even if no one tells them. They feel the shift. The silence changes. The air feels heavier. Another voice is gone. The cell that once held Blaine Milan is now empty. Texas death row does not immediately assign another inmate to that cell. It remains vacant for a period of time, a quiet acknowledgement that something final has occurred. For the remaining inmates, the execution serves as a reminder. This system works exactly as intended. Some inmates become withdrawn. Others become restless. A few grow louder, as if trying to prove they still exist. All of them are counting. The media outside the walls. Outside the prison gates, reporters wait. They've been standing there for hours, sometimes longer. Cameras point toward a facility that refuses to reveal anything beyond official statements. When the execution is complete, a spokesperson delivers a brief confirmation. Name, time of death, method, no commentary, no explanation. Within minutes, headlines appear online. Texas executes death row inmate. Execution carried out after final appeals denied. The language is clinical, efficient, but behind those headlines are layers of human reaction, grief, relief, anger, emptiness. The victim's family. For families of victims, the execution marks the end of a legal process that may have lasted decades. Some describe a sense of closure. Others say it changes nothing. The loss remains. The absence remains. Executions do not rewind time. They do not restore lives. They simply end one more. Many families leave the prison grounds quietly, avoiding cameras. Others speak publicly, hoping their words will give meaning to what they've just witnessed. There is no single response. Grief does not follow protocol. The state's perspective. From the state's point of view, the execution of Blaine Milan was a successful operation. No complications, no delays, no legal interruptions. That matters. Texas has built its execution system around predictability. Every step is tested, reviewed, and refined to avoid failure, because failure invites scrutiny. Each completed execution reinforces the system's authority. An authority, once questioned, is difficult to restore. The body and the paper trail. After witnesses leave, the body is prepared for release according to prior arrangements made by the inmate. If claimed by family, it is transferred to a funeral home. If unclaimed, the state handles burial. Meanwhile, documentation continues. Reports are finalized. Logs are closed. Another file is archived. Blaine Milan's name now exists only on paper. Execution records, court transcripts, news articles. The living man is gone. The unanswered questions. Executions end lives, but they do not end debate. Within hours, discussions begin. Did justice occur? Was the punishment justified? Does execution deter crime? In the United States, capital punishment remains one of the most divisive issues in the justice system. Texas stands at the center of that debate, carrying out more executions than any other state. Supporters argue it delivers justice and closure. Critics argue it is irreversible and flawed. Blaine Milan's execution becomes another data point in that argument, another example cited on both sides. What remains? When the prison returns to normal operations, there is little visible evidence of what happened. No memorial, no marker, no announcement. But for those who were there, For those who watched, escorted, documented, or waited, the moment lingers. Execution is not just an event. It's a memory that refuses to stay contained. And as night falls over the Texas prison complex, the system moves forward, unchanged, precise, and ready to do it again. The system that makes it possible. How Texas built America's most active death row. Executions do not happen in isolation. They are the final act in a system built over decades. An intricate network of law, policy, bureaucracy, and culture. To understand Blaine Milan's final moments, we must examine the machine behind Texas death row, how it operates, why it exists, and what makes it the most active execution system in the United States. Historical roots of Texas death row. Texas has long been at the forefront of capital punishment in America. The state reinstated the death penalty in 1976 after a national moratorium. Since then, Texas has executed more inmates than any other state, often drawing intense national and international scrutiny. From the outset, the system was designed for efficiency and control. The state invested in purpose-built facilities, specialized personnel, and strict procedural guidelines. Over time, Texas refined the process to minimize delays, ensure legal compliance, and maintain authority. Executions became more than punishment. They became a demonstration of state power. The death row experience. Death row in Texas is a world apart from the general prison population. Inmates like Blaine Milan live under strict isolation. Each cell is small, designed for monitoring rather than comfort. Guards watch every movement. Security cameras cover every angle. Conversations are limited. Contact with other inmates is nearly impossible. The goal is control, not rehabilitation, not community. Control. Daily routines are highly regimented. Wake-up calls, meal delivery, legal work, mental health checks. Even minor deviations are noted. Inmates are acutely aware that any misstep could delay, but rarely prevent, an execution. The appeals process. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Texas death row is the appeals system. Blaine Milan's case, like many others, moved through multiple layers of appeals. Trial courts, state appellate courts, federal courts. These appeals often last years, sometimes decades. Each stage is designed to prevent wrongful execution, but critics argue that the system favors speed over thoroughness, particularly in Texas. While other states may halt executions for extended review, Texas has streamlined its appellate procedures to minimize delays. This efficiency contributes to the state's high execution rate. The execution protocol. The execution itself is governed by meticulous procedures. Preparation. Staff, chemicals, equipment, and documentation are checked repeatedly. Final statement. Inmate may speak. Witnesses are positioned. Cameras are monitored. The drugs, typically a 3-drug protocol: sedative, paralytic, and heart-stopping agent. Pronouncement. Medical personnel confirm death. Paperwork finalized. Every step has a fail-safe. Every role is rehearsed. Texas ensures that the system operates predictably and consistently. This is why Blaine Milan's execution went off without incident. The machinery behind the scenes had worked as intended. The people behind the system. Executions require coordination across multiple roles. Wardens and supervisors oversee compliance. Correctional officers manage security. Medical personnel administer drugs. Clerks and record keepers document each step. Legal observers ensure due process is followed. None of this happens spontaneously. Texas has trained staff specifically for executions, creating a professional, standardized approach. Yet, human behavior still matters. Stress, fatigue, mistakes all must be managed. This is why execution teams rehearse scenarios, including rare complications, controversies, and criticism. Despite the system's efficiency, Texas death row is not without controversy. Drug availability. Pharmaceutical companies have increasingly restricted the use of lethal injection drugs, forcing states to seek alternatives. Execution errors. There have been cases of prolonged or problematic executions, sparking debates over cruelty. Moral questions. Activists argue that no procedural refinement can make killing morally acceptable. International scrutiny. European and Canadian audiences often view executions as inhumane, intensifying media coverage. Yet, for supporters, these protocols demonstrate professionalism and fairness. For critics, the efficiency highlights cold, unfeeling bureaucratic power. Psychological burden on inmates. Texas death row is psychologically punishing long before the execution chamber. Isolation. 22 to 23 hours a day alone, with only brief time out of the cell. Surveillance. Every movement recorded. Privacy is almost non-existent. Uncertainty. Long periods of waiting without knowledge of exact execution timing. Fear, both of death and of a slow, lonely existence on death row. In Blaine Milan's case, his final days were marked by quiet pacing, reading, and reflection. His tattoos, once symbols of defiance and survival, now seemed irrelevant reminders of a past life. The role of media and public perception. Executions in Texas are public in the sense that media and witnesses can observe them, but they are not sensationalized spectacles. Still, they attract global attention. Every execution is dissected online. Social media reactions, news coverage, political commentary. For audiences in the United States, Canada, and Europe, these stories provoke questions. Is justice served? Does execution deter crime? What does it say about the society that permits it? Blaine Milan's case is an example of how modern death row balances procedure with human tragedy, how the system is designed to operate flawlessly while the human cost is immeasurable. Texas, as the execution leader. Texas is not just a state with a death penalty. It is the benchmark for execution in the U.S. Its reputation has created a template that other states watch closely. Procedures developed here influence national policies, legal standards, and even international discourse on capital punishment. Blaine Milan's death is, therefore, not an isolated event. It is a microcosm of the Texas death row system, its power, precision, and permanence. Aftermath, reflection, and the legacy of Blaine Milan. The execution of Blaine Milan is over, but the story does not end with the pronouncement of death. In the hours, days, and weeks that follow, the impact ripples through the prison, the families, and society at large. Inside death row, after the execution. After Blaine's death, the death row unit returned to its routine, but not quite the same. Cells are sanitized, hallways cleared, guards rotate shifts, but the absence is felt. Every inmate knows someone has left the world in a way they never will. For the remaining inmates, life on death row continues. Some become more withdrawn, realizing their fate is imminent. Others become louder, more defiant, try to reassert a sense of existence in a place designed to strip identity. The cell that once held Blaine Milan is now empty, a silent reminder that time here stops for no one. Family and emotional fallout. Executions affect more than the inmate. Families of victims, families of the condemned, and even the prison staff experience lingering effects. Victim families often describe mixed feelings. Closure? Sometimes. Relief? Occasionally. Grief, anger, or emptiness? Always. For Blaine's family or loved ones, there is no legal or procedural remedy. They witness the removal of a loved one from society, but the emotional scars remain. Prison staff may experience subtle psychological pressure. Witnessing death, managing logistics, and enforcing procedure creates a weight that is rarely acknowledged publicly. Over time, repeated exposure can lead to emotional fatigue or desensitization, a shadow side of working on the front lines of capital punishment. Media, public opinion, and global perspective. The execution is reported quickly. Headlines announce: Texas executes condemned inmate Blaine Milan. Death row protocol completed without incident. Media coverage focuses on the facts of the execution, but social media and online forums are filled with opinions, both in support and opposition. Some argue that the justice system has fulfilled its duty. Others condemn the execution as inhumane or unnecessary. International observers, particularly in Europe and Canada, often criticize the process, sparking debate about human rights. Blaine Milan's case becomes part of this broader conversation about capital punishment in the modern era. Legacy of the system. Texas death row continues because it is meticulously structured, heavily regulated, and politically supported. Executions are rare in the sense of frequency relative to general prison populations, but Texas remains the most active execution state in America. Each case reinforces the system's efficiency and authority. For inmates like Blaine, death row was more than punishment. It was psychological isolation, procedural certainty, and the slow erosion of identity. For society, it is a tool of law enforcement, retribution, and, in theory, justice. Yet the human cost is always present. Lessons from Blaine Milan's story. Control is everything. Every movement, every detail, every step of the process is calculated. The system is designed to prevent error, not to offer comfort. Time is both enemy and ally. Inmates live decades in isolation, counting appeals rather than hours. The human element cannot be ignored. From families to prison staff to witnesses, executions leave emotional scars that linger far beyond the chamber. Debate is ongoing. Execution prompts ethical, legal, and societal reflection that will not end anytime soon. Visualizing the impact. To help viewers understand the gravity of Blaine Milan's story, consider cinematic B-roll. Empty death, row cells, echoing silence. Guards walking slowly down dimly lit hallways. Family members standing outside the prison, silhouetted by the sun. Media crews packing cameras after official statements. Aerial shots of Texas prisons with moody, desaturated tones. These visuals reinforce the psychological and emotional weight of executions while maintaining documentary integrity. The final reflection. The story of Blaine Milan is not just about one man. It is about the system that created him, contained him, and ended his life with procedural precision. It raises questions every viewer must consider. What is justice? What does society gain or lose through executions? How does humanity survive inside a system designed for death? The answers are complex, uncomfortable, and deeply human. Blaine Milan's story reminds us that behind every headline, every legal document, every official statement, there are human lives irrevocably changed. We've taken you inside the last hours of a condemned man, the precise mechanics of Texas death row, and the emotional weight carried by all who witness it. If the story gripped you, made you think, or left you wanting to understand more about the realities of prison and capital punishment, don't stop here. Checkmark subscribe now to our channel for more in-depth, true crime stories that pull back the curtain on life behind bars. Checkmark like and share this video if you want others to see what life and death on Texas death row really looks like. Checkmark comment below your thoughts on capital punishment and executions. We read every single one and often feature viewer insights in our next documentaries. Every subscriber helps us bring more untold stories, exclusive insights, and real-life prison accounts to screens around the world. Remember, this is more than a story. It's a glimpse into a system, a society, and the human cost of justice. Subscribe, watch, understand, and never forget what happens behind these walls.